Hey, I'm making my own way, but I stumble and I falter every day. But I love my baby now. But I love my baby, I'm still learning how. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Stay with me. We'll beat these
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. Today's topic on Pathways to Parenting Success is helping your child deal with strong emotions. I'm your host, Leisha Connors-Bauer with Boulder County Healthy Youth Alliance. Today, I am joined by Brendan Bauer, who is a junior at Fairview High School, and by Ryan Dawson. And Ryan is a therapist in local practice who specializes in working with adolescents and transition-aged adult clients. Ryan also has experience coaching and working in day treatment and teaches at Naropa. Welcome, Ryan and Brendan.
Thank you, Leisha.
So to get started, one of the things that we're talking about is this idea of strong emotions. And one of my observations is sometimes as a parent, when you're confronted with a strong emotion, that elicits a strong emotion in you as well. And sometimes your tendency is to respond back with a strong emotion, which I don't think necessarily helps the circumstances, helps the situations. So what are your thoughts about maybe addressing that so that as a parent, you're not always responding in that place of a strong emotion? Ryan?
Yeah, so my thoughts on that, I think it's important to distinguish between responding with a strong emotion and actually matching the energy that's happening in the encounter. In working with families and doing family therapy, one of the errors I see is either a parent will try to get larger than the teen that's having a blowout, or they will kind of get way smaller. And either way kind of creates an imbalance in the exchange. So the trick really is to increase your energy, but in a contained way, so you're able to match the energy coming from, the emotional energy coming from the teen, to hold your ground, but not in an aggressive way, but what I would call an assertive, where you're owning your stance, but you're not inviting more through acting out yourself. So
that the situation doesn't escalate to something that it really shouldn't have gone to.
Right. It doesn't escalate, or you don't get walked over like a doormat,
Okay. So, Brendan, I'm wondering about your perspective in terms of the strong emotion piece. Have you ever noticed an imbalance, or has that felt awkward at times to you?
I mean, yeah, I have, and it gets a little awkward when there is that imbalance in the emotions. So for parents, I'd say try not to fuel the fire or anything. And emotions are totally fine. You just don't want too much negativity going into it.
So I wonder, Brennan, pull you in here a little bit. So when maybe you can think back to a time where you've had a challenging emotion and your mom handled it well, or your dad,
Trying to think about last time. There was one time with homework where I just had way too much, because junior year, that's how it goes. And
Indeed.
So they were just pretty calm about it, even though I was I hadn't slept well. I was just kind of panic mode, because I had 4 projects I would do the next day or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And she was just pretty calm about everything, I think.
Okay. So, and I think that also leads into a good driver, I think, or identifying a driver of strong emotions is this idea of stress, and how sometimes teens or kids experience stress and how they handle stress. Because I think that, even as adults, a lot of circumstances, we're still trying to figure out how to manage stress in ways that are productive and not harmful. But I think it might be a little bit harder for kids to manage stress. So Ryan, talk a little bit about what your suggestions might be on how parents can recognize that sometimes that strong emotion is stress-related, and some tips they might have in managing that.
Yeah. And I want to just build off something really quick about teens and their ability to handle stress, because what we do know about cognitive development is that when there's transition in us, it tends to bring natural stress. And if you think about teenage years and adolescence, it's just a whole phase of nothing but change. They're going from, a child body to an adult body. They're going from a child brain to an adult brain. And in that transition is creating all kinds of stress, which is why you see increased needs for sleep and nutrition and whatnot in teenagers. But and also with the hormones. So they're more prone to having stress as it is, and then you start adding on the stresses of school and the pressures of school and of achievement, of sports, of academics, of music, and whatever your teenager is into. That's just adding to that, and so their capacity to handle, family stress at that point actually diminishes. And a lot of parents kind of have the notion that as their teen gets older, that they should actually have a better handle on it. And while sometimes that is the case, they have a more mature perspective. They can see in shades of gray, but their systems are also more stressed out as they're handling all these new challenges of life. And so it's really important to kind of get that part of your kid's world before even entering into the negotiations.
What about you, Brendan? Do you feel that that's an accurate description of teen life?
Yeah, I would feel it is a fairly accurate description. And for parents, I would just pretty much, in high school, I would assume your kid's stressed. Like just with all the normal stresses of being a teenager and then the workload. And pretty much everyone I know has extracurriculars too. So we don't really end up with too much free time. Then a lot of homework. It's like the amount of homework we have at my school is almost a running joke at this point, that if we go to Fairview, we don't have free time because we're always doing homework. So pretty much everyone is stressed, and as you probably know, that stress leads to more negative emotions.
One of the things that occurs to me every once in a while is, you talked about there's so many spheres that teens are undergoing change, in social life, academically, with their extracurriculars, that it sometimes feels to me that when they're home, that for a number of teens, home is where they feel safe. And if they feel safe, then that's a place where they can express those strong emotions where they wouldn't necessarily be able to.
Yeah.
Would you say that happens in some circumstances?
Absolutely, yeah. And, I talk to parents often that when they get to see the stress of their kid, it's actually a compliment, in the form of a stressful interaction, because they're comfortable with you. They get to show you what's happening on the inside. And, when you think of kids developmentally, when they're little, babies and toddlers, part of their job is to transmit what is going on inside of them so they can get their needs met from their parent or caretaker. And kids continue to do that even into the teen years. And sometimes it's kind of a subconscious thing, but they're provoking that same experience that they're having in their primary caretakers and the people that they feel most comfortable with.
Somebody once told me that the toddler years are, that the reason temper tantrums occur as a toddler is because toddlers haven't figured out the ability to self-regulate their emotions. And that's one of the processes that they go through is this temper piece, to understand their emotions, and that they learn how to regulate by the reactions that they get from people around them. And I sort of feel like in some senses that as kids get older and they experience strong emotions, that if they're in a place where they can express those in a safe way, that also helps teach them how to regulate those emotions as well.
Yeah, especially if there's a few things that I think are key as parents to intervening, so it's a healthy resolution to these things. One is understanding that teens don't have a grasp on how to handle these big emotions, no more than a toddler does. I encourage parents to see their teens as large children rather than small adults, and so having some forgiveness for when they blow out, and their temper tantrum is going to look scarier. Brendan's a big guy. If he were to get really upset, I would be, a little frightened. And I'm, 6'3", 240 pounds, and and I can just imagine a lot of the mothers out there that are dealing with teens that are having kind of a blowout. But 99% of the time, things will calm down, and that's really important. The other thing is, so not to shame the kid for having a blowout. And once again, to keep everybody safe, make sure, if it's feeling threatening at all, to make sure people take, proper measures to ensure safety in the household, but also to come back as soon as you can after a blowout. And and to have some kind of repair so the learning is there. And it's important to be done as soon as possible, because the brain will actually start rehearsing some of like what I would call like negative neurochemicals, the stuff associated with anger and anxiety and things like that when it's not resolved. So it's important to kind of close that loop like you would with a toddler, like you would with a young child, even with a teenager. So as they learn to deal with these strong emotions, and to make sure that if there's a rupture in the relationship between the parent and child, to repair that as soon as possible.
One of the things that you touched on earlier, Ryan, is you talked about the changes that are going on in brain development. And I think that what we know from current brain development research now is that there are two really busy periods in brain development when kids are young, that sort of 1.5, I think, to 4-year-old period. And then again, when they're teens and their brain chemistry is changing, the neurons are changing, the synapses are developing. And I recently read that one of the things that happens as teens are undergoing the brain development is that partly because of their changing brain, that it's harder for them to interpret emotional reactions from people when they see somebody's face or something they interpret it, but they don't always interpret it correctly, and that sometimes that misinterpretation can also lead to maybe strong emotions between peers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there was one interesting study done where they actually tried to recreate a teenager taking the place of somebody else and seeing something from somebody else's perspective, and they neuroimaged it as the teen was trying to take on another person's perspective versus an adult taking on another person's perspective. And they found that the teen actually uses a different part of their brain to try to take a different perspective, and they make a lot more errors when trying to look from another person's perspective. And this part of our brain actually doesn't start to come online more solidly until we're in our mid-20s. And so this rehearsal of like trying to take on another person's perspective is, like with any new skill or any unformed skill, is going to be bound to have a bunch of errors. And I'm wondering, Brendan, if you've ever been in a situation.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely true, where people misjudge emotions. Like, I know for me, it's pretty much every time where someone misjudges my emotions. Like, I don't know what it is, but like they'll just look at my face and like I could just be feeling really tired, and somebody's gonna be like, "What are you so mad about?" And it's like, I'm not mad, I'm just barely awake. And so that happens a lot, where people just misinterpret like my facial expression and think it means something. Then that also happens with my voice sometimes, where it's like they'll ask why I'm talking the way, like if I sound angry or something. Like it might just be that I'm like dehydrated, like no emotion at all, and they just interpret it really strongly.
So you just have the deep gravelly, Barry White thing going. Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah.
So I wonder about that, Brendan, when you've mentioned how people sometimes misinterpret your emotional responses, and how do you handle that? I mean, I know you said, "Oh no, I'm just tired," but if people keep asking you consistently, does that begin to provoke an emotional response in you?
I mean, it used to, but now I've just kind of gotten used to it, and I pretty much figure people are going to misinterpret it now. So I'm sort of expecting it, and it doesn't really bother me as much now that I know it's going to happen.
Does it bother you more when your caretakers misinterpret?
That is a little more bothering, because they've lived with me for a couple of years. Well, my whole life, actually, rather than some people at school who've known me for maybe a month, depending on the people.
So your expectations are higher of your parents to actually
I feel like my parents should know me a little better than someone who I've only had one class with.
Yeah. And so that's another piece of the thing when you're, as parents are working with their kid, is that there's going to be more pressure on that situation for the parent to get it right. And I think as parents to have, oftentimes you are going to know what it is, but to be humble when you, in your guesses and trying to guess as to what's going on. That one of the things I talk to teens about is that parents aren't mind readers, and so it's important to try to find words for what's happening inside of you rather than assuming your parents are going to just totally understand what the situation is on the inside.
Yeah, and I think that that's an important piece too, because I think that parents also have a lot going on and are going to make mistakes in that area, and it seems like that's the case where we need to have patience with each other as we navigate this. I saw something on the Today Show recently about how there's a report card that kids can fill out on how well they think their parents are doing as parents. And one of the group that they tested it with, one of the things that the parents consistently did not do well in was being able to understand their child's moods or emotions. And so it sort of tied in, I think, a little bit that as, you know, your children have lived with you their whole entire lives. And so, like Brendan said, there's this expectation that they would understand you a little bit better. And I wonder sometimes if part of that is because, you know, as parents, we have to see our children going through a lot of changes that we don't always understand how those changes are impacting those kids, even though we live with them every day.
Yeah.
And so I sometimes wonder if maybe that's part of where that misinterpretation comes in, and maybe some of the mishandling of strong emotions.
Yeah, and I think, that patience piece is huge, what you're talking about, that parents have with themselves and that they also demonstrate to their kids, because their kids don't know often where they're coming from. Like, their whole world's turning upside down, and the rules and the family rules and societal rules as they knew it to be hard and fast are realizing they're a little more, they have more negotiative ability in, but which is empowering, but it's also terrifying, because then all of a sudden this world becomes bigger and they have to find new ways to deal with it. And so it's hard to know what exactly is triggering, a teen at any given time. So to have some humility and patience and with everybody in it, that's big.
So one of the things that I'm thinking of, so when we think about in terms of strong emotions, and so, for example, you talked about this earlier, Brian, about like if you have a teenage son and you're a mom and your son is more physically imposing than you are, this is what used to be your little kid, and now they're physically imposing. They're in your face, they're yelling at you, they're really emotional, and it's hard not to react. What would you recommend that a parent do in a circumstance like that, in the moment? Yes, totally hypothetical.
We're not talking about Brendan here. Yeah. And this is big, because I work with a lot of like single moms, and the first thing is always safety. Like, if it feels unsafe, get out of the situation, because what happens a lot of times is we try to negotiate in really charged situations, and what we know about the brain development or how the brain works is that when it's a really charged situations and emotions are high, our brain actually loses its figuratively loses its connection to the neurocortex, which is a part that slows down behavior, that's able to think rationally, that is able to think from another person's perspective. That kind of goes offline. And so we're left in our amygdala, which is a much faster threat-seeing part of the brain. It's more primitive, and so it doesn't have all the levels that we're hoping to access when we're negotiating with somebody in a relaxed place. So if it's charged, don't try to negotiate. Just once again, you can assert and hold your energy and hold your ground, but if it starts to get a little untenable, to make sure everybody stays safe in that situation. That there's no victory in getting your point across by power or force, I think, at that point, because you can always come back to it. But it's important to let the situation calm down, and that it's actually victory to be able to walk away, because it's demonstrating good emotional regulation in oneself and how to handle when we ourselves flip out a little bit.
I think sometimes that's actually the key piece about in knowing how to handle strong emotions in somebody else. Sometimes that key piece is knowing how to handle those strong emotions in ourselves as well. Mm-hmm. I've been reading a lot more about mindfulness techniques as a way to do that, for people to just take that moment and maybe take those 3 breaths and be more mindful about how you're feeling and mm-hmm. and what kind of response that your body is having. Because it seems like if you're faced with somebody who's having a strong emotional reaction and your instinct, your amygdala kicks in and your instinct is to have that same fight response, then that's not going to be a good circumstance for anybody.
No, that's when it gets messy typically.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, they say we lose about 10 IQ points in that, and people say stuff they regret and stuff that's hurtful, and, then it's just harder to make the repairs afterward. But, as Michael Bradley would say, parents never look so big in the eyes of their child as when they're able to say, I'm sorry. Like if you do lose it and you do do things that you regret, to role model that piece of the repair. And like you're saying, Leisha, it's like with the mindfulness piece, is to be really aware of what's happening. And so you can demonstrate and you can role model how to handle when the emotions are big. Like, hey, I'm actually feeling really angry right now. I'm gonna take a step back because I don't want this to get any worse. So it's if you can be transparent and know what's happening inside of you in these situations, I think it's a huge asset to the interactions.
Brendan, from your perspective, maybe you could share with us how the part about what Ryan was just talking about parents offering an apology. From your perspective, how would you feel, or how do you feel when you receive an apology from a parent?
I feel like the apology for this kind of situation is good. I mean, obviously, give it a little time and then come back. That's probably the best way to do it. Because you're probably not going to have the best apology if you wait 2 weeks. I mean, sometimes you might even forget what you were arguing about. Right in the moment, they might not realize it's happening.
Yeah.
So just wait in a couple hours or maybe even a day or two. But yeah, definitely an apology is probably a good idea if you lose it.
Yeah, that's an important piece, and that timing thing. And it's it's like that sweet spot between it being too long, where it's now it's been swept under the rug, but the wounds haven't quite healed, and there's some unfinished business there. And between coming back too soon and trying to use the apology as a way to get your way, it's got to be sincere. It's got to be from the heart. Teens have a really good kind of what I would call BS detector. And so to make sure that you're in a place where you're offering a sincere apology, but to do it as soon as you can, because once again, you don't want to promote these negative neurochemicals just kind of hanging out there and lingering. You want to bring that neocortex back online and to help your teen and yourself see the other as not a threat.
So one of the things that I was thinking is the emotional piece. To me, looks different in elementary school than it looked in middle school, than it looked in high school. And I know that the external pressures and the societal pressures have changed as you make those various transitions. And I was wondering, Brendan, if you could talk a little bit about how those transitions may have impacted how you respond to things emotionally?
First of all, change is a little bit of an understatement there. Everything's just completely different from elementary school. I can't really say how it affected my emotional reactions to things because I honestly don't quite remember how I emotionally reacted in elementary school. I'm going to guess that it probably wasn't well when I was 8, but I probably didn't have as much control, and I probably had different emotions to certain situations. Well, also probably different emotions in general and different ways of handling it. Different things that would cause everything. It's basically everything is different, yeah.
I think that's good, actually, for us as parents to be aware of. It's just how different things change as they progress. Because maybe when, it's one day your child walks out of middle school and then, a few weeks later, they're walking into high school. And it may not seem like that big of a time period, but I think for the way your child feels, that may be a big change. Right, Brendan?
Yeah, the difference between middle school and high school, as far as the individuals go, between that last day of 8th grade and the first day of freshman year, most individuals aren't going to change too much in that time, but there is that, everyone's going to be aware that high school and middle school are different. I mean, and even if you're not, you're going to be aware of that walking in on the first day. Everything looks different, sounds different, people are different. So then you're also going to, in those first couple weeks of high school, there's also going to be a lot of change just reacting to that new environment.
Okay.
Can I add a piece around, just from a mindfulness perspective too, is that, when you start getting into later teen years, you're actually going from a place of where emotions kind of dictate your behavior and your choices. Think of the 3-year-old throwing a tantrum in the store and sitting down, which is appropriate for a 3-year-old, but, as a middle school teenager, they're taught not to, listen to that and, to let the intellect guide their decisions more. And that actually takes a lot of lot of practice, because the first step is repressing some of those emotions, and then they have to learn how to relate to those emotions all over again, especially the hard ones like anger or sadness, or the ones that, in our society we don't see quite as often in public. Like, how do you relate to these things that are actually happening? Because at least the way I see it, emotions are a fact of life, and we don't have much control over what emotions we feel, but we do have choice on how we relate to the emotions moving through us. And one of the things that I talk about is like helping kids to like touch it, to feel it, to let it move through, but not necessarily having to do something about it right then. The first step is just to be in relationship to it, whether it's anger, to feel it on a body level, and to kind of what I would call create space around it to let it move through. But to separate emotions from behavior, and that's something that teens are doing, pretty actively, and it's hard work.
I like the point that you made about everybody feels emotions, and we should be conscious about the emotions that we're feeling. And I know that one of the things over the years that has helped me is to try to name what it is that I'm feeling as a parent in that particular moment. We have just a couple minutes left, and so what I'd like to do is just to offer each of you a minute or two for any closing comments you'd like to make. And Brendan, even if it can be some suggestions of coping skills. And Ryan, if there's something that you feel like you haven't had a chance to touch on, and we'll go ahead and start with Ryan.
Okay. Just in terms of coping skills, I think they're important. I think they can be overused. One of the great things about a coping skill is just distraction. When you're having a negative emotion, to use a coping skill, or ruminative thoughts, or especially coping skills are good for. And ruminative means like just turning over the same thought. If you can distract yourself for 2 minutes with a coping skill of any kind, and then come back to what it is you were doing. So coping skills are actually really effective and to interrupt that process, and that'll help us relate to what's going on with us in a new way. But coping skills aren't to be used to like check out or to numb out, but just to distract long enough till we get back to center and can relate to actually what's happening in us.
Great. So. Brendan?
I would like to say for parents, just be aware that your teenager is going to be changing a lot. And since you're living with them and you're presumably seeing them every day, or in some cases for divorced families, like just on weekends, but that is still fairly often. So you might not notice these changes, whereas like if someone goes away for a couple months, you're going to notice if they've changed. But if you see someone every day, you might not notice that they're changing. So for parents, just probably try and be aware of that, because that is certainly going to be going on in the teen.
Okay, great. Thank you both. Thanks to my panelists today, Ryan Dawson and Brendan Bauer. I would also like to make sure to thank all of the sponsors of today's TV show, particularly the Boulder Valley School District, Boulder Psychological Services, and BV Channel 22. I would encourage anybody who is interested in learning more parenting tips and techniques to check out the Boulder Psychological Services website at boulderpsychologicalservices.com. This lists future TV shows as well as webinars that are available and in-person talks taking place at the Meadows Branch Library, the Louisville Library, the Mamie Dowd Eisenhower Library in Broomfield, and some sessions in Lyons as well. I would like to thank everybody for their time today, and I hope to see you again soon.
And now the planet's done its bowing down. And soon the growth returns to follow ground. But I know what's churning underneath the snow. And I love my baby and we've miles to go. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Be with me. We'll beat this, can't you see? So wait a while, winter time.